Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by the one and the only Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here once again from distant locations at Lambeau Field. Wes, maybe, fingers crossed, the last time in a while that we'll have to do the show this way. No promises, no guarantees. We will see what next week brings. But in the meantime, since our last show, the Packers held their last two public practices of training camp out at Ray-Nitschke Field on Tuesday and Wednesday. Wednesday was an awfully hot one, but everybody seemed to get through it okay. Your observations as the Packers wrapped up these last two public practices.
Rashan Gary wanted to play some football was my observation. I'll tell you what, Mike, he's been going through the individuals the last couple of weeks. As Matt LaFleur told us earlier this week, he was finally going to take that next step to team. I was so incredibly impressed by what I saw from number 52. First and foremost, he took 2 one-on-one reps in the offensive line versus defensive front drills, and going up against Zach Tom, who is a terrific offensive lineman, I think is going to be a good starter for the Packers for years to come. But when you see when they always say there's levels to this game, that's a big phrase in MMA, but Rashan Gary's on another level now, because the one thing I took away from his 2 reps against Tom, and a lot of it was just showing his natural strength, and also some of the pressures he had on Jordan Love in the team periods. Had one of the sacks, I think you would call it perceived sack, in one of the team's drills. Here's the thing about Rashan Gary that is so impressive to me. When we came in, and he's a 21-year-old kid, and everybody knows, okay, he's going to be a project here, but there's a lot of potential there. We talked about how he would rely on his bull rush a lot, right out of the gate. When you talk about all the other tools and the other weapons that can be used in his arsenal, I think that's what we're seeing with Rashan Gary in those rushes against Zach Tom. He used some speed. He used some speed to power. He used his power to get out of a stalemate situation. The guy's just so darn resourceful. And we saw it last year, those first 9 games. I mean, he was on track to being a Pro Bowl player. Yeah. And unfortunately, the ACL happened in Detroit. So hopefully for him, that's all in the past. But I'll tell you what, for a guy that hasn't played football in 9-10 months, he came out looking like he was just guns a-blazing.
Yeah, and you talk about the development of the repertoire. I mean, that's the progression that you see from these guys like Rashan Gary, who the first thing he had to do when he was drafted and came to the Packers in the 3-4 defense is he had to learn how to play defense standing up as opposed to in a 3-point stance with his hand in the dirt. There's that transition. So early on, they're still just going to have that one move to rely upon, and then all the other moves have to come. And, he had guys like Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith and these other guys to learn from, and the coaching staff and everything else. And we've just seen this steady progression from him. And we're seeing Lucas Van Ness going through that same kind of transition right now. Played mostly with his hand in the dirt at Iowa, and he's learning how to play standing up and learning all the responsibilities on the edge. And Lucas Van Ness has not developed all the pass rush moves that he's going to have either. And there are so many parallels there that hopefully for the Packers, he stays on the same trajectory as Rashan Gary. But I agree with you with just I don't know if energy is a word that's used a lot. And I don't even know if that word quite exemplifies what Rashan Gary brought to these last couple of public practices. There was something different about this Packers defense with him on the field. I think his teammates were excited to have him back. He's a wrecking ball in some respects, and there are no guarantees yet that he'll be available for week 1. Things are certainly trending in that direction, and hopefully the Packers can get him out there against the Bears at Soldier Field come September 10th.
This quote is so good. I want to make sure I get this right. I typically don't go off screen during Packers Unscripted, but I want to make sure I get this right from what Matt Schneidman had tweeted to us or sent to us earlier this week. And I'm not going to be able to find it because he probably put 23 instead of Alexander. Let's look. No, not going to find it. I'm going to paraphrase it. I hope I'm not going to botch it. But basically, Alexander said he feels like Superman when Rashan Gary's on the field. And I think that is the sentiment that everybody shares in terms of, yeah, in addition to the fact it's going to put more pressure on the quarterback and decrease his time clock to be able to get that ball out, it's how everybody around him raises their level of play. And I think when you have a premier pass rusher in this league, that is what the trickle down effect is. When you look at the Packers defenses in the early Clay Matthews era, when you talk about, Aaron Campman in the mid 2000s, Reggie White, the list goes on and on. Those type of players, they set the tone. And I felt like, Rashan Gary, for still being as young as he is, it's all still out there for him, Michael. And as you touched on, and I think one of the things you've been working on too, story-wise, is when you have a Rashan Gary, when you have a Preston Smith, a Kingsley Enagbari, and then inside, Kenny Clark and these other guys that can get after a quarterback, you make an offense start to make some decisions. And if Rashan Gary's going to get doubled this season, whenever he is out there, well, then that's opportunities for one-on-one matchups for Preston Smith, Devontae Wyatt, Kenny Clark. That's the exciting thing, I think, about having Rashan Gary back in this defense.
Yeah, I mean, just what we've seen in his couple of days back, he is going to command so much attention from opposing offenses, and I think that's going to change, create opportunities for other players, as you said. And one of the stories that I've posted now on Packers.com is just looking at where the Packers are at outside linebacker heading into 2023 compared to how they ended 2022, because you had Preston Smith, who I believe he had 5 of his 8.5 sacks last season after Rashan Gary left the lineup, but you didn't have Gary. You had Enagbari, who was a 5th-round rookie who was just trying to figure things out. You had Justin Hollins come in trying to reacclimate himself as quickly as he could to Joe Barry's defense, and he certainly made a contribution. Jonathan Garvin was taking some snaps, not providing a whole lot of production. They were just trying to survive at that position, quite frankly, down the stretch last year without Gary. Now you fast forward here. Gary is on his way back. Preston Smith is Preston Smith. You've added a 1st-round pick in Lucas Van Ness. Kingsley Enagbari just had a 2-sack game in the preseason. He's showing the year 2 jump. Justin Hollins has now been here. He's settled in more. And you have an undrafted guy in Brenton Cox who showed enough promise early that the Packers moved on from Jonathan Garvin, and Brenton Cox could be an undrafted rookie who ends up making this 53 when roster decisions are made next week. The depth at outside linebacker right now compared to 9 months ago is night and day.
2 things. One, Aaron Mosby also got claimed in the midway through camp. I think Mosby's had a really nice camp too, for a guy that unfortunately is kind of at the bottom of that depth chart just based on attrition and the guys who have been here. I can now get that quote correct, though, because I'm all about the accuracy here, Mike. You know that. This is what Jair said. A healthy Rashan Gary is like Superman, in my opinion. He makes my job easier, a whole lot easier. Yeah. If I was on ESPN, that's how I would close my segment. And I would just, and then back to you, Mike.
Okay. Well, the other thing I think that's worth talking about here as the Packers wrapped up these public practices is we saw, I think in a lot of ways, these practices finished up the way they started, in that we saw
hot,
yes, but we saw a lot of back and forth in terms of the defense providing some challenge to the offense, and then the offense responds, and then the defense responds. There over these last couple of days, there were stretches where the pass rush was really getting after Jordan Love for, a sequence of plays. And then suddenly the offense settles in and Love starts to find his rhythm and hit some passes. Then we see I believe it was on Wednesday, we see the offense looking like, they're hitting some nice running plays. And then the next thing, TJ Slayton is in the backfield, 3 or 4 times in a span of, like 8 or 9 plays or something like that. The back and forth. And then the epitome of that was the last 2-minute drills. The number 1 defense won the drill with Rasul Douglas getting an interception on a pass for Romeo Doubs. But then Sean Clifford, Mr. 2-minute, takes the number 2s down the field, hits a 4th down touchdown pass to Grant Dubose, adds the 2-point conversion on top of that. So you have the defense win one, the offense win one in the 2-minute drills at the end. It just seemed like these last couple days, everything was about the one side challenging the other and trying to push the other side to provide an answer. And I have to believe Matt LaFleur liked a lot of what he saw in that regard.
I think You're 100% right about that. But the other aspect of it, I think that is so refreshing is when you have a young team like this, how exciting and energetic these practices have been. And not to say that, when it was Clay Matthews and Jordy Nelson and Aaron Rodgers and all that, they weren't. There was plenty to be, taken from. But there are some, like when you go into those one-on-one periods, you don't know always who's going to prevail in those. I think that's where I first started to know TJ Slayton, to be honest with you. And he's had, I've said this time and time again, I think him, Rasheed Walker, those guys are probably in the conversation for most improved player. I mean, Kingsley Enagbari contributed at the end of last season, but, he was a 5th-round pick and you already had seen some of that growth. Those two guys have just blown me away just with the role that potentially they might have to play on this team this season. And Walker going from a guy that didn't play at all last year to a guy that now is, being charged in these practices as the left tackle for Jordan Love and in the preseason game as well last week. So to your original point here, I think the give and take of the offense and defense is sort of indicative of a young football team kind of growing together. And the same way in which you look at those Patriots practices, the Packers take it to the Patriots the first day, the Patriots respond back the second. There's a challenge there. There is a motivation and a competitive fire, I think, that comes out of, both of those two sides of the ball working against one another. The hope would be for the Green Bay Packers now, as you get through this game against Seattle, hopefully healthy, get through the 53-man cut and start building to that game against Chicago, that you have a much better football team than you did 8 weeks ago. And I feel like that's where Green Bay has really grown the most in terms of just the development and the maturation. This is one of those training camps where I think you can literally look at players and see the growth. And for some of the Packers vets in the past, it was about, okay, getting back to that baseline. Where do we need, what's the play style? What's everything like that? Matt LaFleur is establishing all of that right now. And I think that played into also these young guys, getting this action in the preseason games, because one of the things I wrote in Insider Inbox this week was the fact that you have a bunch of guys that need snaps, and we are no longer in the Larry McCarron 2-a-days, 51 practices or whatever of training camp. Yeah. You got 24 training camp practices and 3 preseason games. You have to make those opportunities really count.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk to you more about this preseason finale coming up against Seattle, but I'll take care of some sponsor business first. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50 years of better.
Mike, guess where I ate earlier this week for lunch?
Cousin Subs?
Yeah.
That a boy.
The steak Philly. The steak Philly.
Nice.
If you like hot subs, that is my suggestion for you.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. One preseason game to go, Weston.
Yes, sir.
And there's going to be a lot to pay attention to in this game, whether you're talking about the battle for the last spots at wide receiver, again, that number 3 running back spot. What's going to happen with some final decisions at defensive back, how they're going to piece that together, and certainly special teams plays a role in all that. And then special teams themselves, there's still 2 punters and 2 long snappers on this roster that have had a training camp long competition at both of those spots. So where will your eyes be trained on come Saturday afternoon? Oh, by the way, it's an afternoon preseason game at Lambeau Field, a noon Central Time kickoff, a rarity here in Green Bay. Not that I'm complaining, because work-wise, it's much nicer to have afternoon games. But back to my question, what will you be watching for come kickoff at noon Saturday against the Seahawks?
It's an excellent question, because there are so many different ways you can take this thing. Offensively, what does that number 1 unit look like with Jordan Love? How many series do they see? They had 2 in the first game, 3 in the second, although I think that was kind of brought on a little bit by the botch snap there early on.
Right.
But the fact is that, how long does Matt LaFleur want these guys to play? Sean Clifford probably can use the reps, but he's gotten a lot of reps at this point. So, when does Alex Magoo get into the game? He's only played that 1 game, and unfortunately for him, it was an 80-yard touchdown on his first snap. As cool as that was for the Packers offense, not really a chance for the USFL reigning MVP to show what his arm can do. So those type of things are going to be important. Certainly the safety battle is going right down to the wire. When you look at, where they're going to be trying to find that 1-2 combination with Darnell Savage, that whole thing's come full circle again. Rudy Ford back with the starters this week.
Yep.
And Tarvarius Moore has taken those snaps. Jonathan Owens has taken those snaps over and over and over. And they kind of
unfortunately for Moore, now he's injured. He got hurt, hurt his knee in the last preseason game. So bad timing for him, but we'll see what happens here these next few days.
The number 3 running back battle, the offensive line battle. But the one thing I challenge people to look at and keep an eye on, this is not the most attractive thing to pay attention to, but the coverage teams, offensive kickoff and the punt return units. Very interested to see what that personnel looks like. We've seen from Rich Bisaccia, he's willing to mix and match. So I wouldn't take everything as, chapter and verse in terms of what the starters are, quote, so to speak. But I always go back, dude. James Crawford, 2018, he made the Packers roster based on special teams in the Packers preseason finale in Kansas City. There's going to be at least one of those type of situations where somebody steps up, somebody makes their presence felt, because as much as the Packers are building this offense and defense, they're also building these special teams, this defense as well. And when you lose a guy like Tyler Davis, who was your leading player in terms of special teams snaps seen last season, I think he played like almost 80% of the snaps. That is going to be a big challenge for Green Bay. Who's going to step up?
Yeah, absolutely. And that the special teams reps, whether it's a kickoff return, a kickoff cover, a punt return, a punt cover, those reps are being scrutinized on film over and over and over again by the personnel department as they're trying to decide, okay, who are the guys that can be counted on to get the job done in that phase? Who are the guys who are separating themselves in that regard? The Packers have a fair number of veterans now on special teams. That's been one of the big shifts in terms of the roster and the personnel in that phase since Rich Bisaccia came in. But there are a lot of young guys who, are trying to make a name for themselves, and they're not necessarily going to be second string on offense or defense, but there are going to be some roster spots available, and can they put something on film that's going to get them noticed and get them a chance to either be on the 53 or be brought back on the practice squad next week when all these roster machinations take place.
And Malik Heath is the guy also, Mike, that I'll probably have my eye on the most. I mean, undrafted rookies, we know the history and the backstory with the Green Bay Packers and at those spots. If he can put together a strong performance in this preseason finale against Seattle, I don't know what that all means for Tuesday and how the Packers will sort through it, but this is a guy that, Mike, you and I were talking about him at OTAs, and he has just continually done it over and over again. So impressive. It reminds you of the Alan Lazards, the Jake Kumerows, where you have an inundation of draft picks at receiver. You remember when Kumaro made it the first time, I gave Jake no chance at making the 53 because they had 3 rookie draft picks that year. Just so turned out that, you had Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but otherwise there was a lot of opportunity still there, even though there were those incoming picks. This is going to be critical to see exactly how the Packers shuffle this out. I do not envy Brian Gutekunst and his scouts. I know they relish these opportunities. I know it's a challenge for them, and it's an excitement that they don't have to go to, well, we got 47 players, and who else do we want to fill up this roster with? No, I mean, it is going to be a tedious cut to 53, no doubt about it.
I think one of the things, and we'll kind of close on this, one of the things that has struck me about watching Malik Heath, as you said, we've watched him, through all the way since he arrived here, is that a lot of times when undrafted guys catch your eye, it's always like, oh, like where's he from, or what school did he come from? And, you look up and you try to get to know him a little bit.
Yeah.
If you didn't know the background of Malik Heath, the question you'd be asking is, what round was this guy drafted in? I mean, and that's not always the case. Undrafted guys will still kind of look like undrafted guys, right? He hasn't looked like one. The question, it's like you're wondering what round was he drafted, and he wasn't drafted at all. And he's made a strong case, but we don't know. Are the Packers going to keep 5 receivers or 6 receivers or 7 receivers? How many are going to be on the 53? How many will they want to bring back on the practice squad? We really don't know what's going to happen here. There are always decisions that are made that nobody saw coming, right? In terms of how the initial 53 is built and how that practice squad gets put together. So we will just have to see, but there will be a lot of nervous time between the end of the game on Saturday and when the decisions are made on Tuesday. It's a tough time for these players, but it's also what they signed up for, right?
Yeah, and the one that probably is going to tug at your heartstrings the most, at least tug at my heartstrings, is the running back competition, because you got a bunch of dudes that are all good, solid guys competing for that number 3 spot. Patrick Taylor has been here for 3.5 years. I mean, obviously the injury that he had kind of wiped out his rookie season, but has been one of the more beloved players of that locker room. Very close, tight-knit group. Obviously a contributor on special teams. Tyler Goodson, I thought, did everything that is physically possible to make a run at the 53 this year. Unfortunately, he gets the shoulder injury at the wrong time. We'll see how things play out for him this week. And then also, I mean, Emmanuel Wilson, the stories don't get much better than this kid. Division II, Fort Valley State, coming in and being a late add to this roster as the Packers are looking for an extra running back and some guys being banged up. And then he ends up having, he's leading the NFL right now in preseason rushing. I mean,
yeah,
that is probably going to be the one the most. It's like you'll be happy for whoever prevails, assuming the Packers do keep 3, hoping that they keep 3. But yeah, your heart kind of goes out to the rest of them, because that whole group has been a lot of fun to cover this summer.
Yeah, and I think as we know, injuries are never good. They're always unfortunate, right? But I think aside from Tyler Davis being lost for the season to the knee injury from the Cincinnati preseason game, there was maybe no more unfortunate injury in this training camp than Tyler Goodson with that shoulder injury, because all the way up until the time he got hurt, he looked like he was really, really making a statement and making a run at this 53-man roster and to be that number 3 guy. And but he has not been able to get back on the field since then. So you just don't know how these things ultimately are going to go. But
maybe this week, we'll see. Maybe this week.
You never know. You never know. With that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team as training camp wraps up, as the preseason wraps up with Saturday's game against the Seahawks. We will have it all for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.